It's Victober again in BookTube land. Basically, if you don't know, Victober is a readathon for the month of October. It's hosted by Kate Howe, Lucy the Reader, and Katie from Books and Things on YouTube. The idea being to spend the month getting acquainted with Victorian literature, which for the purposes of Victober they classify as any book published in the UK during the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. They usually have an additional challenge or set of challenges that aren't compulsory as such or anything, but they might give you ideas for what to read, that sort of thing. I did it last year and it was fun, so I'm doing it again. This time round, however, I'm doing it after, frankly, not having read anything in months. In fact, I've read very little since the previous Victober, so I thought maybe doing it again would get me out of that slump. And the logical thing to do, of course, would be to ease my way in with a shorter book. Victorian literature is known for its long triple-deckers, but there are shorter examples out there, like the early H.G. Wells stuff. So it would have been sensible to pick something short to ease me back into reading. I am not sensible, and so I instead picked a book that runs over 630 pages. The book in question is The Black Monk, or The Secret of the Grey Turret, and it's an example of that particularly Victorian phenomenon, the penny dreadful. By the 1830s, England was undergoing some major cultural changes with the Industrial Revolution, and one consequence of that was a new market for cheaply produced, cheaply sold, and widely distributed popular fiction aimed particularly at working-class readers, of whom there were a remarkably large number by then thanks to increasing literacy rates. They were a penny per issue and dreadful in terms of the quality of their writing, their content, their production, and also in terms of the ethics and scruples of the people who published them. A lot of the dreadfuls were outright plagiarisms of more famous books by more famous authors like Dickens and Walter Scott. And they also provided one of the first great mass media moral panics, kind of like the mid-20th century comic books that were in many ways descended from the penny dreadfuls. They were amazingly popular in the 19th century, but they're a bit of an obscure phenomenon now. Much like the Gothic novels of the 1790s through the 1820s, which were one of their ancestors, there were an amazing number of penny titles at their peak, but now most people who know them at all probably only know a handful of titles, and copies of them aren't exactly easy to come by. Plus, a lot of them seem to have been anonymously published, which kind of complicates matters further. The Black Monk is credited to James Malcolm Rymer, who may have written over 100 other novels and may have been writing 10 or more at the same time that he may have written this. The Black Monk comes to us these days via Valancourt Books, a small press from the US for which I am a little bit of a fanboy. Valancourt specialise in restoring books to print that haven't been available for decades, or indeed centuries in some cases. They started out reprinting a bunch of the original Gothic novels from the 1790s, some of which now exist in maybe one copy and haven't been reprinted since maybe the 1790s. As the introduction to The Black Monk notes, there are apparently only 4 complete copies of the original edition still in existence, so it's pretty well within Valancourt's remit. The Black Monk was serialised between 1843 and 1844 and was apparently one of the most popular penny dreadfuls in its time. It takes quite some amount of inspiration, shall we say, from Walter Scott's 1819 novel Ivanhoe. The setting is Brandon Castle in England in the year 1202. The young wife of Sir Rupert Brandon has lately died, and in his grief, Sir Rupert goes off to fight the crusade in Palestine with his good friend King Richard the Lionheart. In his absence, the deceased lady's sister and brother join forces with Morgatani, the Black Monk of the title, to basically steal the castle from Sir Rupert and win the favour of King John, who's usurping the throne in Richard's absence. Various mysteries and apparitions ensue, including a mad wizard out for revenge upon the monk, and an assortment of secondary characters of unknown identity. In fact, I think there's one such character introduced very late in the book who I think remains unidentified by the end. I don't know if I'm confused or if Reimer was. This was a fascinating look back at what was apparently one of the great publishing hits of the 1840s, and from it I got the impression that its original readers wouldn't have been unduly bothered about the niceties of such things as historical accuracy. For one thing, Richard the Lionheart had already been dead for some years by the time the book begins. And, a bit more problematically, Morgatani, the titular villain, is a Jesuit. And the Jesuits are clearly regarded by the other characters in the book as borderline Satanists. Obviously, England was still Catholic in the 13th century. This was obviously well before the Reformation, so Reimer couldn't really indulge in the sort of anti-Catholicism the older Gothic novels tended to trade in, so making the Jesuits villainous was the next best thing. Problem is, the Jesuits weren't actually founded until the mid-16th century, over 3 centuries after the story takes place. The book's sense of time generally is kind of its biggest problem. It's very clear about when it's supposed to be taking place, but it feels throughout more like it's set in the 16th or 17th century rather than the 13th. And I also never had any real sense of how long the duration of the story is. It feels like a matter of days, but the logic of the book's conclusion requires it to have been at least 3 or 4 years. I don't want to explain why, because that'll give away the ending, but that's certainly how it felt to me. But, for all of its faults, The Black Monk still has something compelling about it, because Reimer was writing to keep people buying. With any sort of serial enterprise like this, you need to keep drawing your viewers or readers back. You want them to be interested in how the story continues. And somehow Reimer pulled it off here for 52 issues of the original series. Not as long as some Penny Dreadfuls managed, but a pretty fair effort nonetheless. And I was entertained pretty much from start to finish. So, that's Victober Book 1, and the reading drought is hopefully pretty solidly broken. Not sure what's coming next, but I'll try not to take quite so long with it.